So thank you very much for this opportunity just to share a couple of thoughts. You know, really the three things I want to kind of talk about, and I really don't want it to be a project. You'll see every slide I've got is a different slide format. So I literally spent the last 48 hours going to the best decks that sit in Microsoft across to try and bring out the concepts and the thoughts that I think here are relevant. So if hopefully you'll either violently agree and tell me, or you'll violently disagree and correct me in terms of some of how I want to position and talk to some of this. And then the ask really, or the brief, was then to try and say, well, I mean, I think the question was asked earlier, what should I do now to get started? So if I've decided this might be worthwhile pursuing, what should I do now to get started? So the problem is cloud computing is absolutely white hot from a hype point of view. And just, hearing the comments before, the question I would say is if I pulled this from a website last night and it was someone's cloud computing pitch. It's the first paragraph of their text, and it's great. It's utility computing, it's telephone electricity, modular hardware, it can scale, it's got security, and it's got systems management. Anyone care to guess what vendor that came from? So that was Multics in 1964, MIT, GE, and Honeywell. So that was there. That is the intro paragraph in the Multics.org space. Okay, so the point I want to make really is that, and I think that the point was well made earlier, is that actually cloud computing in many ways it's in no way a revolution. It's a simple continuum of what we've been trying to do to deliver IT as a service. And the great news is that getting to this point now, hardware, in other words, compute, storage, and then bandwidth, the point about bandwidth was made earlier as well, has now become ridiculously cheap compared to even 5 years ago. And the comment that somebody was sitting on a train and having video calls and internet calls, and that's kind of just normal. That really was science fiction 5-6 years ago. And that the kind of investment you needed to make to get that kind of capability yourself was very, very extreme. This has truly now become a commodity. So really the journey that we're on is simply making it just work, having the end user just experience it, is the sort of the enduring mission of IT. Now, I'm quite comfortable, even if my kids get into IT, we still won't get there, right? So there's a broad future of what's going to happen coming, but the reality is I don't think it's such a complete different world that we're jumping into compared to the kinds of work that most of you folks in the room are doing today already from an IT perspective. It's a natural evolution of IT as a service. Now, the specific issues from a cloud point of view, and I think the point was made earlier in a number of ways, but it's really, really important, is this consumerization of IT driver. And the reality is now I think we're going to see a proliferation of devices that folks are going to simply just want to use. And in the end of the day, all it will take is your boss's boss to decide he or she wants to use that device, and you just got to get to support it. And if you're in an environment whereby to do that in traditional ways can be very, very expensive, you've got lots of folks jumping in and out of the organization, lots of different kinds of work done. So that's all very, very challenging. And the point, if you like, the fundamental point that the technology enables us to do now is to actually get back to good old client-server computing done right, or mainframe computing done right, whatever way you want to call it, whereby now we can actually say, look, let's do two things from an independence point of view. Let's take our apps and insulate them from the consumption devices, and let's take our apps that are running in the back end and insulate them from the infrastructure upon which they're running. So they're the two things that cloud computing gives us. If we do a good job of that, we as a vendor, ISVs as people who provide solutions, and then yourselves as to bringing them together and integrating them into your organization, getting those three things right is going to be the art and science of a CIO, of an IT leader moving forward, rather than perhaps having to worry too much about some of that detailed underlying provision, because that's where the value is going to be. An awful lot of this other work is going to commodity. Now, I have to obviously choose my favorite definition of cloud computing, and this is this was actually last year's. You see, the slide was slightly duller; it was darker blue. And what is cloud computing? So it's the just-in-time provisioning and scaling of resources and shared hardware. So that's the working definition I'm very comfortable using for private, for public, for all the different forms of flavors and Gartner Hype Cycle and Forrester they're not Magic Quadrants. And the two things, and the reason why this is interesting economically, is that truly you can get to the solution much, much faster, I mean, in many well-run IT shops, it takes 3 to 4 weeks to get, a decent server up and provisioned to get access to deploy an app. Whereas if you get into a private cloud environment, that could be done in 20 minutes, half an hour. Completely different kind of time dynamics. And also then cost. But cost is a double-edged sword here. And that I think a lot of people have said, you can't just expect it to be cheaper jumping in. You need to be very, very careful from it. So let me just, and again, really quickly, try now just to position how we think about infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, and then I think how you might like to think about using them. So from an infrastructure view, so this first perspective is simply coming at the perspective that in traditional computing, you had an application, you took a fixed set of infrastructure to deliver the application and you ran it, and that was grand and everyone was happy and it got very expensive and you got very large data centers. From a virtualized computing point of view, this was great. You got to simplify your data centers, you got to share hardware and resources, but still you've pretty much had a fixed kind of fixed kind of sharing going on in terms of how we're using that particular work. And the point about cloud computing, again, I'll reiterate it, is to abstract both the endpoints that are going to use the apps and indeed the apps themselves from the resources they need, such that you can then get cloud scalability. So you get agility, reduced costs, and improved control. So if you come at this from, if you like, the traditional infrastructure lead perspective, this is how you might like to think about cloud. And this lands firmly in the infrastructure or the infrastructure as a service particular space. What's happening here, and this applies just to say, well, again, why are we bothering with all of this? So this chart, I've put up a number of times, and it either gets completely ignored or causes lots of controversy, is an attempt. So it's a metaphor. Don't take it too literally in terms of the precise dollars and the price numbers of service. It's a model the guys have worked. And what it's trying to show is, it's trying to say, here's the traditional data center environment, and here's how, depending on the size of that environment, or fancy calling it a cloud, what perhaps the total cost of ownership might be of that device. So what we're saying is, depending on how well run you are, you could have, quite a range of prices. The point that's being made is, first of all, that public cloud is always going to be cheaper than private cloud. And secondly, that private cloud should get you to the point of view whereby you're getting great sharing. Now, the reality is, though, I don't think there's too many organizations in the world that, have this size of a data center, So the point is that for most businesses, you're operating in this kind of a zone in terms of the economics. The whole point and the whole reason why it's worthwhile for Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and others to invest in mega data centers, and the whole reason why it's a good value proposition for consumers to come use that, be businesses or consumers, is that you can then take the fact that if you take Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, we're kind of over here, completely off the scale in terms of the cost that we can actually build and operate those data centers for. And it means that if you can drop your logic that's sitting here onto something of that cost, there's a great kind of, dare I use the phrase, pool of profit that can be shared out in the market between the supplier and then between folks who are consuming it. So there's a really, unlike perhaps some of the dot-com work, there genuinely is an economic argument that says there are true economies of scale here. And if you move to a public cloud environment, when it's appropriate, you can get those economies of scale released into terms of what you're trying to do. Okay, so maybe you'll ask later about that. The other view then is, so that's one lens coming at it from the infrastructure world. I mean, I grew up as a developer, started in Unix, and very much think about things from the developer perspective. This guy, Chappell and Associates, I've stolen his slide from TechEd, and I kind of like the way he drew the picture. So again, because if you think about it from the developer point of view, you've just got users using a cloud application, and this is just software as a service. I'm not going to really focus on that. That's just the use of software. The real issue here is when you actually write software such that it's written in a way, to a platform as a service model, written in a way that it's insulated from the endpoint consumption devices, and it doesn't really know about the infrastructure in which it works. That's when things get very, very interesting. And I know it's simplistic, but really from a developer point of view, if you're talking about, to say, a computer science grad, coming out of college now, the point is that it's going to DOS Windows as your level. So it is actually a platform change. So it doesn't mean that you can just write code as you would have done for, say, a bunch of servers, a bunch of servers, a bunch of role workers, and deploy them up onto the web and had your front end. Certainly that's all possible and interesting, and you get some benefits from it. The real interesting thing is when you think about big data, when you think about many different kinds of algorithms and approaches you can apply to say, very, very practical business problems that you're running with, there are now new ways of writing that code that I think are going to actually enable new kinds of things. I think the comment was made earlier is that IT still is too visible. We need to make it invisible. And by building on this new platform, there is a different way about thinking about how you can code those apps. And the thing that gets me very excited is there are literally thousands of startups now worldwide. That's just in our platform. I know there's tons on other platforms trying to do very different new things that are going to give us, I think, very new, interesting kinds of software running on the app. Now, I guess, so I can keep my job, I have to have a slightly competitive slide. So if we take software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service, I've heard various names mentioned already, and sort of how I'd position them from a Microsoft perspective is if you think about global providers, service providers, and these are interesting. Service providers these are the folks actually that have the biggest short-term business problem, on the planet because of cloud introduction. Because you can be an outsourcer or a hoster, and what's going to happen here to you and to your business model is not determinate. It's a very tough one. I mean, there's planning models within Microsoft that say there will be 3 data centers in the world in the never-neverland future. There'll be 30, there'll be 300, there'll be 3,000, there'll be 300,000. We just don't know how it's going to pan out from a market point of view. So that bit in the middle, in terms of service providers and what value gets added by that particular element, is going to be really, really interesting to see how that develops from a business model point of view moving forward. And then clearly customer simply means on-prem. And the point, hopefully, I'm getting across is that from our perspective, we've tried to take software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service and say, hey, we would like to provide a single IT as a service option to give you a number of different entry points into those levels. And then this is all great. This is all high-level kind of talk. I guess the real question, though, is that when this is a summary slide, and it sort of summarizes the 3 kind of conversations that we tend to have when we talk to customers. This has been for the last, I don't know, so I've had the pleasure of worrying about the server market in the UK for the last kind of 2 years now. It literally dropped 25% in terms of server shipments during the recession, which is very, very non-linear, okay, given everything that's gone before. And now it's back up and it's continuing on its track. So a huge number of organizations have simply been focused on cost savings now. And that's absolutely something that will have a very hard ROI from a short-term point of view. Customers like Royal Mail Group that have kind of virtualized, 800-odd VMs now. They're saving lots and lots of money every year because of this. It's a very kind of short-term, let's optimize what I've got right now. And it was interesting, actually, the point came up earlier with Royal Mail Group. They have 20% more workers in November, December, January. Okay, and it's great because they're licensed, because they've done Office 365 as well. Their licensing costs then just flex to go with that. And that was a good example of the cloud economic model actually, directly working for those guys. The next point then is that, and again, the question is, what is your job as the CIO, as the IT department? What do you want to be? I love the logic that said, I'm going to be a governance council for a bunch of service providers. About 10 years ago to a now nationalized Irish bank, I was talking to their chief architect, and he simply said, my job is, I'm actually a proprietary systems integrator. I just happen to work for the bank, and I just do systems integration work, and I manage that work. And again, it really, there's some interesting role questions come up in terms of what the IT function of the future is going to become, and how that's going to work. But traditionally, there's a lot of very vanilla apps, very standardized apps, such as perhaps email. I heard someone earlier say they're not comfortable with outsourced email, and that's cool. But for many organizations, there's certain apps and workloads that are very generic that can be outsourced, and that can be a very good short-term step. But finally, I would argue this is the jewel in the crown for an organization that says, hey, doing something with an IT app can give my business model a competitive advantage. So it's all about actually saying, I'm going to get cloud economics for my future apps, and that's the true difference, if you like, between an IaaS and a PaaS strategy. So it's actually saying, I'm going to develop apps in a way that will naturally run on a cloud. And let me just, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Right. So any questions on that before I jump on, or should we just take questions at the end? Any thoughts?
We'll take questions at the end.
Yeah, okay, great. So the point about IaaS, so I just want to give a couple of thoughts or a couple of ideas about what would you do to get started, to try and answer the very relevant question, so what now? What do I need to do next? The point about infrastructure as a service actually is it is the most continuous next step piece of work you could do if you were managing a data center. Okay, so it's again, you need to think about your hardware strategy. Are you using standardized hardware? Are you using standardized hardware that is you can get a good deal on? I think many organizations now are being quite smart, and they're taking, say, Dell and an HP, and they're making sure they're using their standardized hardware and bringing it together so they're getting the best deal from a hardware perspective. But are you using standardized hardware? The next point then is, and the critical issue, the single biggest differentiator from Microsoft's perspective in terms of the cloud and all of the abilities of the cloud is manageability. And it's about being able to absolutely manage your physical boxes if they're part of your configuration, your virtual boxes, and then critically your apps, all together in the one pane of glass. So it's the ability to have that one view of everything, whether it would be on-prem or in the cloud, whether it would be virtualized or it would be physical, whether it would be in the app or not. It's that ability. And clearly, I have a product to sell. I'd like you to use System Center. But the reality is that is the absolute essence of being in control versus not being in control. Knowing in advance something's hitting a load level, and you need to have a strategy to I love the Chocolate Friday story. Knowing that you're getting into this environment and being able to actually manage that environment is probably the single most important thing, I think, technically you need to bring to the table. And then again, it's the ability then to do the burst workloads such that from even an infrastructure as a service point of view, you can quite readily, as the example was used here, to go to Amazon. I mean, we don't actually, Microsoft, we don't have a pure infrastructure as a service offer. You can go to an Amazon, you can bring up a Windows VM, and you can actually burst out into that particular workload. So this should be the most canonical sort of set of next steps for an organization moving forwards. If I make some comments from a platform as a service point of view, the critical thing here is just to dip your toe in the water. And to dip your toe in the water very carefully by segmenting the apps that you want to play with and taking something that's low risk, that's not highly complex from a business perspective, that's not highly complex from a technology perspective, and seeing what happens. It's like trying to explain to somebody why they need a color TV, right? And apart from snooker, why do I really need a color TV if you haven't experienced it? And it's a complicated kind of one. We did a lot of work with Transport for London, and they had a system that during the strikes where you got real-time tube information, it literally fell down every time a strike was called because everyone was, come 4:45 was trying to find out if their tube line was working and what the story was. So we worked with them and co-invested with them to get that app up onto Azure. Now it nicely scales, and we can see in the back end, when people are looking for real-time tube information. The thing that I find most interesting about it now is that team has played with that environment, and we helped them there. They're now doing most of their new app development on that environment because it's actually just easier. And the big benefit is that if you write your new app or your code to the Azure platform, there's nothing stopping you targeting that also on just to the Windows Server platform. So you can write it and decide, well, maybe later on I can put it in the public cloud, or I can just get it to run on a traditional server environment as well, either the one that I'd host or one that's in an outsourcer. And what you're doing then is you're taking any investment in new business logic development, and you're sort of hedging your bets. So you could deploy it up in the cloud, in the public cloud if you wanted to, but you can absolutely continue to do it in an ordinary environment. Now, when you talk to all the wonderful techies you have in Microsoft, they give us these great graphs that say, look, cloud is really good for all these models, right? And, my favorite story is Coronation. I don't know how many Coronation Street fans are. Coronation was a Facebook game that they launched during the ad breaks of Coronation Street. So clearly there were going to be some very defined windows of that game being used. And, we pulled the usage stats of that game, and you can see absolute peak workloads during the ad breaks, and then after the show of the particular game being used, which no way could that small marketing shop actually have been able to afford to actually build and go do themselves. And that's the classic, burst and unpredictable model that can be used. However, it's interesting to note that more than 50%, I would say, of application usage patterns aren't fitting into any of these cool kind of science graphs. They're just ordinary apps that people are choosing to deploy up on the cloud. So it's yes, you get all these great capabilities, but I would suggest about half of the organizations that we're seeing using this don't actually, in practice, require them. If there was one takeaway in terms of cloud development, it would be to plan for all your apps to have the potential to run in the cloud, and then at least you have the choice in the future. Because, you go back to the old US defense studies, something like 98% of software investment in the US Defense Department is on systems that are never even commissioned. Now, I think, perhaps the real world's a little bit better, but if you actually, get to the point whereby you have a working piece of business logic, that's super valuable. When I worked with Credit Suisse, they've got their systems of record on IMS. I don't think it's ever going to change, ever, right? It's a working system. It's a system that they trust. So what I would suggest is the most important thing to do is when you're building business logic, accept the fact that it's strategic and important, you want to build it in such a way that that can be durable and that you can have choices as to how you deploy it in the future. And that would be the one key takeaway, I think, to give you the flexibility for now or the future. If you don't like your cloud provider, you can go run it in a regular Windows server and move forward. So I think really with that, there's some other material I'd like to present, but I think maybe with that, I think I'll pause at that slide is closing and then just, take any questions.
Okay.
Great,
fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, Maurice. Again, I'd like to start the questions with one of my own. So I'll give you a scenario. This is about long-term public cloud usage. So say I'm a software development company,
yes,
and I have a short 3-month software development project. It's going to be cheaper for me to rent infrastructure and platform as a service from the public cloud to do that project than it is to buy in my own equipment. But let's say as soon as that project completes at the end of 3 months, I have another 3-month project, so it becomes 6 months, and that keeps going on. Is there a point at which it would have been cheaper for me to buy my own equipment to begin with and not keep paying on a usage basis than
Do you now mean specifically for that bunch of developers?
Yes.
Yeah. So the typical usage that we see from a developer point of view is developers love their hardware, and most developers will want to have cool top-end PC environments for doing the development on. And certainly from an Azure point of view, or indeed from a regular Windows point of view, I would still, people will still develop on their boxes, and they can run Azure emulators, and they can do most of the test development cycles on that environment. So in other words, you only really start paying for deployment and productive usage once you actually put it up onto the cloud. And typically from an Azure point of view, you can stage your app into a private area for absolute final testing, so you're running on the real thing before you go live. But most of the development cycles you'd still actually run in across your set of actual on-prem servers and PCs.
I see.
That's certainly the model that we're tending to see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, the floor is open to any questions from the audience. So feel free to put your hand up, and we'll get a microphone to you if you have any questions you'd like to ask. We have a couple. We have two there. We have John and then a gentleman behind him.
Okay. So, I think this is fascinating, and I think the Microsoft vision, goes a long way. I'm interested in where you think the industry is going overall, though. So you're a good example where you've got half the company effectively in the new world and half still in the traditional licenses and software world and so on. Is cloud going to get to a point where it is 100% of the software industry, or are you banking on there always being companies that are going to buy, Windows, Office, Oracle, whatever else it may be?
Yeah, no, I think we are seeing. Our belief is we're going to see in time a significant migration of the. So if you take 100% of today's workload, I think we're going to see a significant migration of that to the cloud. And certainly we're engineering our business models and the investment plans we have internally to support that model. So we're absolutely, hate to use the expression, all in, right, but we're absolutely all in on the cloud. That said, absolutely, there's going to be a significant requirement, an ongoing requirement for on-prem, an on-prem, I don't want to call it a bridgehead, but an on-prem bridgehead to the cloud. And it's interesting if you look at the IDC server stats. So if you actually look at server shipments, the logical thing would be say, well, if I exclude the mega data centers, am I not going to see physical hardware units now? I would have expected to see physical hardware units go like this. And that's absolutely not going to be the case. I mean, IDC are forecasting 7-8% compound annual growth for the next 3 to 5 years. So, it's not that in any time soon, your existing set of data centers are going to go away. What's going to happen is you're going to get to a hybrid environment whereby, I don't know how often it is your organization builds a new mission-critical system, but let's say you've got 50 of them, and let's say you do 5 a year. Well, that's 10 years of migration, okay? So it's not going to be light bulb, but I think what we're going to see is, I think ultimately we're going to see a significant majority of that work eventually get to the cloud. Simply for the economic drivers, it'll be cheaper to do it that way.
Fantastic. We had another question at the back there.
Hi, it's Tim Hoff from EC Harris. I have to say, most of the things you've said I agree with, and they sort of resonate with me. There's one observation I make, which isn't a disagreement. It's a lot of the fantastic tools that are making the cloud so flexible, so you can go onto a website and provision a server and it's ready in seconds, has come back round into the corporate. You can now do that in the corporate environment just as well. So actually some of the things that seem like fantastic advantages of the cloud are now no longer such advantages because you're able to do that internally as well. So that's just an observation. The other thing was actually picking up on something you said at the very, very beginning, rather than this presentation, which was your incredible shock that some of these organisations, 50% of the organisations, you're talking about the SI organisations, are not actually allowing people to have access to Facebook and the social networking side of life, as though this is some sort of Neanderthal thing that any 13 or 14-year-old that's coming up is going to demand that they do all of their work in a Facebook environment, which, and I was just having a chat with someone before, and I'm completely agnostic. I don't really care if my business wishes to have Facebook or not. We did have a problem that Facebook and YouTube used up more than 50% of our bandwidth. So we got rid of them. I've now got loads of bandwidth. It's up to the business. They don't want it back. But there is, of course, the marketing people sort of saying, well, it's good for sort of, viral recruiting and all this sort of thing. Facebook seems to me to be not a business app. Things like having forums for your company to discuss issues are useful business apps. And, I'm looking forward to Microsoft actually producing something which is very similar to Facebook to use internally rather than just sort of SharePoint, which doesn't go nearly far enough. But that was one thing why are you so surprised that 50% of companies don't allow access to social networking sites when actually most of the transactions going on there are not related to business?
I guess the point was that I think if we talk about traditional blue chip organizations, if you tell me that the internet access, I mean, it would have been 15 years ago, organizations would have simply said, we do not permit any form of internet access. Right? And that would be quite common. I still know of organizations today where you have to get a paper form signed in triplicate and approved so that you can have internet access. I think we're seeing that diminish. I think the observation that I would have made was that I had made a mental assumption that if you're going to be a leading, basically a technology shop, you're going to want to be hiring the best talent possible, and you're going to be providing an environment for them where they can interact kind of in the same way as they would at home as in work with their peers and with their co-workers. And that's just done on Facebook. I mean, I have a Facebook page. I'm not a heavy user of it. When I look at folks that are in my team that are between, say, we've got a grad that's about 21 up to folks in their 30s, that they are living their lives on Facebook. And that it would just strike me as strange that the very shops that are trying to attract the best kinds of IT talent would have actually been so traditionalist in their approach. That's what surprised me. Certainly from a Microsoft point of view, I suspect Google, I suspect Amazon. I think if you turned off Facebook, a large proportion of the staff would revolt. There's perspective. Yeah. Just your earlier point, though, in terms of self-service portals and the ability now to get those private cloud-type capabilities internally in your organization, I think that's bang on. And I completely agree with that. And that principle of automated self-service and provisioning of infrastructure is a humongous, super positive step forwards. And the fact that you just now expect it is a really good thing. I think getting to the next level whereby you're doing that at an app level rather than at a, I now need to get this, I think that's the interesting transition to come.
Just to echo your earlier point, I speak to quite a lot of CIOs and IT directors day to day as part of my job, and that's something I've heard quite a few people say, that if one of the questions that new graduates ask at interviews is, do you allow Facebook access or can I access Facebook at work? And if they're choosing between your company and another, and that could be a deciding factor, crazy as it sounds, I can't imagine using Facebook myself in the course of my work. But, I'm not 21, and at that age it is just, it's part of life, whether that be personal or whether it be in the office based.
And the thing that's going to be interesting is that literally 3 or 4 years ago, again, when I look at my kids, it was IM and email. It's now Facebook. I'm quite certain it'll be something else in another 5 years. But the reality is it's the old prohibitionist approach where you say, no, we will forbid this, we will have our wall around our garden and we will not let anything in or out is, I think, an old way of thinking about the problem set. You then absolutely have to say, well, if you're hiring folks and you're letting them surf the web for whatever inappropriate content or do whatever they want in Facebook, that's a different problem to solve, but I'd argue it's probably not a technology problem.
I'm not sure you need to, because most of the kids also come in with smartphones anyway, which gives them their Twitter, their Facebook and everything else.
Well, that's
and
the
so
point.
they can do it, but if you like, when they're actually facing their PCs, they're doing work. When they're fiddling on their phones, they can do the personal apps, and we tackle that exact problem. I give them a free bar. If they might not have Facebook, they get free drinks, and most graduates say, thank you very much, I'll go for the free bar.
A hierarchy of needs.
Yeah. Fantastic.
It works.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions from the audience? If not, I have a question myself regarding CFOs. And this comes back to a slide you showed earlier, the one which you said might be controversial, with showing the expense or potential cost savings of public cloud and
it was total cost of ownership of the server. Yeah.
So one issue that I hear raised a lot is that people are very excited by the potential benefits of the cloud, but they've already invested in all this infrastructure already, or they've bought the software licenses for the operating system. So much as they'd like to take advantage of the platform and infrastructure offerings in the cloud, at the same time the CFO is saying, well, we spent this many millions, we've got this data center, we're not going to scrap that and throw it away. So when it comes to its natural end of life cycle, which could be a long time in the future, then we'll go into this. Is this something which you see as a big barrier?
I'd violently agree with that CFO. Yeah. That's exactly the right decision. The question then is, with that asset that you're trying to sweat, how can you operate that asset more efficiently using private cloud software and management techniques over it? And absolutely, the other issue too is, and this is maybe a little bit more controversial, is that if you've got working apps today, I would not advocate that you suddenly try and rewrite them en masse or port them even to the cloud environment. I don't think that's economically sensible. Absolutely go host them in a private cloud environment. That makes complete sense. Whether you do it on yours or through a third party, absolutely makes sense. But I wouldn't advocate the redevelopment of those apps. What I would say, though, then, is the intelligent extension of those apps to use cloud technology and capability is very, very interesting. And one of the earliest adopters in the UK, actually, of Azure was EasyJet. And I can't think of a more gnarly legacy integration problem. They've got systems literally from the 50s up to internet booking engines. So they you name it, they've got it. It's a very complicated systems integration environment. But by using the cloud, by using the public cloud, they were able to have a common information backbone, almost like an EAI type model, using the cloud as the point of integration. And they could then bring up from many, many different systems information and integrate it very, very quickly to develop new services that they could then push out into the web system. So even in the environment where you have lots of existing apps, I would say absolutely leverage them, sweat them, leave them. They're very valuable and important. But if you need to extend them, don't start writing a new business logic in the old way. See how you can make those apps play using cloud technologies in different ways.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Do we have any more questions from the floor? If not, another...
It's the free bar is getting them, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
No one can take their minds off that. A question which, this is an area we've touched on already today, but I wanted to speak about security because it is something that's raised commonly when people talk about jumping into the public cloud specifically. One thing we heard about earlier, I think from Alex, was the prospect of encrypting your data before you put it out into the cloud, yeah. and that is one way of making yourself more secure. Not completely secure, again, that depends who owns the cryptography key, but still it's a method of being more secure. Is this something which you see as being a major barrier to entry into the cloud? Is cryptography the answer, or are there other sort of risk mitigation strategies you need to put in place?
So it's a very broad area.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've been working with one of the traditional UK banks, and it's interesting. Their question back to us after playing with cloud technologies for the last 18 months was, actually it's very interesting, was, actually we're not worried anymore about the security implications of using a global vendor. That's not what we're worried about. The thing that we're worried about is actually the SLA. So notice the thing is, can we build a system, so just like any of our other suppliers, can we have a contract with you for a system to make sure we get what we need if we're going to put a mission-critical system onto that app? And in fact, that is, and I think should be and is, the right discussion to have for a mission-critical app deployment. From a security point of view, absolutely encrypting your data is one approach. I think from a SQL Azure point of view, you can have encrypted tables, so you can also encrypt relational data, and that's quite interesting. We also have a capability called Azure Connect that lets you keep your data in your data center, ship it up just for the workings of the algorithm that you could have running on the cloud, and then keep the results again back down in your data center. So there's nothing persistent from a data point of view in the cloud. And particularly in the regulatory industry space, that's becoming an interesting pattern. So they can absolutely say, no, all my data is here, with all of the requirements they have from that regulated industry in their data center, say in the UK, if it's a sovereignty issue. But they can still leverage the compute power of the cloud, and they can find an appropriate way, an appropriate usage way to do that. It's interesting. Certainly, we've our main data center in Dublin in Europe. We've our secondary data center in Amsterdam, and we're very happy through your account manager or through your partner to appropriately have site visits. You can actually go see it and understand how it works. The great reason why, of course, it was located in Dublin was that the weather's so crap, they only need to turn the air conditioning on 3 days a year. So it's very, very cost effective. I'm sure that would equally apply to the UK, actually, although it is a little bit warmer here.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Do we have any further questions from the audience at all for Maurice? If not, then it remains to say thank you very much for coming, Maurice. Thank you to everyone, all our speakers today. Thank you also very much to you for coming to today's event. There are feedback forms in your delegate pack, so we'd be extremely grateful if you'd fill those in and leave them here for us. We also have another IT Leaders Forum event next Tuesday. This is on virtualization. That's going to be not here. It's at the British Medical Association. Details for that can be found on our website, computing.co.uk, under web seminars and events, I think is the tab. That's at the same time on Tuesday the 14th, 3:30, sorry. Besides that, thank you very much for coming, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.